Hi everybody, Jay Ryerson here. I'm a longtime IT professional and security professional working with small businesses very much like yours. And when I say small, I'm talking about businesses with anywhere from 2 or 3 employees up to 2,500 and 3,000 employees, helping them solve their challenges around technology and specifically cybersecurity. Now, if you're on our webinar today, well, thank you and congratulations for being here. You're investing the time and energy necessary to understand where cybersecurity fits into your business. We've got a lot to talk about, but I'm assuming that if you're here today, it's because you're concerned about what the impact of a cyber attack would look like for your business. And if you're not, you probably should be. At least enough to make sure you're asking the right questions and focused on understanding what the impact might be to your specific business. Now, cyber attacks happen, to all different kinds of businesses, and we see lots of industries, that are impacted. These are some of the most common we see, but don't feel like if you're not on this list that you're not part of it, because really cyber threat actors, don't care what business you're in. They just want to be able to hold you to ransom or hold you accountable for, sending them money to get your files unlocked or get your emails back or whatever might be the actual threat that they're launching against your business. So while finance and healthcare, construction, legal, and manufacturing are important, again, if you're in a different one, that's okay too. If you're in these, you should probably pay close attention to what we're going to be talking about today. So look, why should you care about cybersecurity? Everybody wants to know, well, why cybersecurity? It's not going to happen to me. I'm too small. They don't care about my data. And we'll cover some of those topics today. But it is important that you start to understand what the impact would be to your business so that you can be prepared. At the end of the day, survival is probably more important than anything else when it comes to security. Understanding what that looks like, is a key part of today's conversation. And of course, we know that the rapid shift into remote work environments, has had a major impact on security for businesses. No longer do you have the benefit of being able to hide behind the company's firewall to protect your business, which is effective, but now people are working remotely, and what are you doing to really accommodate that? And we don't see that changing at all in the foreseeable future. Businesses are rethinking, probably just like you are, what it's going to look like for their workforce, in the future. And so we're here to make sure you're thinking broader than just protecting what's in your office or in your closet, as part of your data center and your data servers. Ultimately, what really happens is organizations don't know what the impact is, and because of that, they tend to, underestimate what it's going to look like in the event of a cyber attack. So I want to make sure we provide some value and some business insight into what that looks like for you today. Ultimately, understanding the threat landscape is going to be very important to you. And yet, I'm not saying you have to go out and learn all the types of attacks and where they're happening and how they're happening, but you do want to understand the ones that are impacting small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, SMBs as I like to call them, so that you understand exactly what it's going to look like in your environment, should it happen to you. Because today it's not really a question of if, but when. Of course, there's a lot of research on that, and I won't dive into each of these numbers, but I'll give you a moment here just to take a quick read through some of the most recent stats that we've seen. I think the one that probably is the most interesting is the number of SMBs that are concerned that they'll become a victim in the next 6 months. This survey was done by a group called Vance and Bourne that has surveyed over the last 3 years, thousands of SMB owners to understand what the impact of security looks like for them. And so we're not talking about it enough. We're not having the right conversation per se to really understand what cyber means to your business. And I'm hoping that today we uncover some of those topics. So our goals for today, look, we're going to talk about the impact of cyber attacks in small business. We're going to talk about things that you can do today. We'll talk about where the layers of security fit in. And ultimately, again, what you should be thinking about when it comes to assessing and understanding your environment specifically, because each of your businesses are a little bit different. And you've got different challenges based on where data resides, what's the legislation issues in your market, and things like that are part of a bigger conversation that we won't have time to cover for everybody today. We'll cover a few, but not all of them. So ultimately, we really want to know why cybercrime is exploding. The why behind this is actually kind of an essential part of the conversation. So let's start with that. Why is it exploding, and why is this such a big issue today, and why has it not been a bigger issue before? Well, the reality is that the challenges to keep your data secure, to protect your business, are becoming harder and more difficult because the threat actors are finding new ways to circumvent the protections you might already have. If we say that the landscape is changing, what we really mean is that they're just being more creative. They're more organized, they're more structured, they're running their business as a business, and in doing so, they're finding more weaknesses by learning what you've already done to protect your business to find new ways in. Now, at the end of the day, hackers, threat actors I prefer to call them, can bypass the basic controls that used to be sufficient. Even 3 and 4 years ago, antivirus and a firewall and a few other controls did a good job of controlling most of the issues that you might face. But there are still plenty of other ones that were becoming broader and a much bigger, much more creative ways to get into your business. We've heard about social engineering, taking advantage of your staff and their untrained understanding of where cyber fits in to use them as an entry point into your network. And they've gotten more and more sophisticated over time. Ultimately, we've got to solve this, and it's truly a team sport. And I'll cover that again in today's call. But really to understand what you can do to help protect your business and do your part, because it's going to take all of us to really help address and solve these issues. Now, I think the most fascinating view in the world actually came recently from Forbes. I'm going to read this. Unauthorized software and devices and stressed and distracted workers have expanded the attack surface and left businesses exposed to a number of cyber risks. Small and medium-sized businesses are most vulnerable since most of them run legacy or outdated systems. In such challenging times, management teams need to have a strong oversight on the cyber threat landscape. What they're saying is it's time to pay attention to cybersecurity. It's time that you focus on what it means to your business and not just bury your head in the sand. We can't do that anymore. It causes too much harm and too much pain for businesses. And so when I start to look at what that landscape looks like, we start talking about nearly 65% of all attacks are happening to SMBs, businesses just like yours. But we don't talk about that, right? It's not sexy. It's not cool to actually talk about a business that got hit that has 26 employees or 4 employees or 175 employees. When a Home Depot or a Merck or a major company out there gets compromised and there's millions of records impacted. And yet the impact of an attack on a small business is far greater than those bigger businesses. You can't recover as fast as they can, and they've got resources where most of us in the small business world don't actually have those. So what are we going to do? What is this going to look like? Well, we're not there yet. We got to keep understanding of what's going on and what it actually looks like. We're starting to see, as I mentioned before, that sophistication in attacks. And that this particular chart comes from the FBI, that their division called the Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3. They put it out every year, and this is from 2020. These are the top 10 states, by the number of victims. Now you can look at this and say, okay, these are fairly populated states, so that's relevant. But proportionately, every state's going through the same issues, right? That they're challenged. So don't think because you're in New Mexico that you're off the hook. Or if you're in Maine, you're good. If you're in Atlanta, Georgia, or the Georgia area, you're all right? You're not. It's just proportionally, you're not up with the largest populous states. And so it's really cool to see it, because if you're in those states, you should be looking over your back and around the corner to make sure that there's nobody lurking in your network, right? Of course, how are you going to do that? So we also look at areas where there are losses, things like ransomware. Because if I'm a business owner, look, the reality is we don't have the budget of the White House or the military. So we've got to figure out what we can do to defend against the most common attacks that are being launched against small businesses. Ransomware is one of them. Ransomware is a major issue that keeps getting called out and is creating more and more pain for businesses. You've probably heard about it, those types of attacks. We're seeing losses with business email compromise. That's actually the largest threat to small businesses, is where somebody gets one of your employees to wire money inappropriately or send money inappropriately. to a threat actor. Okay? It all starts with an email account that's compromised, and maybe it's as simple as one of your critical vendors gets compromised, and you don't know it. They're not going to reach out and tell you, and they haven't even identified the attack yet. So what happens next is the attacker uses their email. They'll look at previous emails sent to you, and they say, oh, look, here's a copy of an invoice. Let's send them a note with their next invoice saying, hey, we had a security issue and we had to change banks. So would you mind updating your ACH payment information to our new account? And your team just receives that and says, no problem, we'll go ahead and make that change. Because I know where this email came from. This looks just like ones we've done in the past. It's definitely them. I'm too busy, I'm not thinking twice about it, and I just take action. The next thing you know, that vendor calls you in 2 months and says, we haven't been paid. You guys okay? And you're looking around like, what do you mean you haven't been paid? Of course we paid you. Here's our 2 payments. They're like, that wasn't our account. So whose fault is it? Is it theirs because they were compromising and from their email they sent you a change? Or is it your problem because you made the change without, trust but verify, right? You haven't actually checked it. Your controls didn't account for that. And so you're both at a loss because you don't have the money to pay them and they're not getting paid. So there are concerns. And these are areas where we just have to focus and really make sure that you guys understand what that means to your business. In the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a major trend in business email compromise, causing fraudulent transfers of money. I mean, that's what it really boils down to. And there are other side effects, obtaining information about a business or people that matter, maybe upcoming business transactions you've got, business plans. I mean, think about what would happen if an attacker got access, to your CEO, your CFO, your key sales leaders, maybe engineers, research and development email accounts, where they could see emails that are being passed around the company, probably with attachments or links to attachments and documents where they can go out and see what your business is doing. That's a problem. And of course, it's gotten worse. Matter of fact, last year, when we look at this, 45% of all the attacks were business email compromise at an average loss of $96,000 per complaint. So I don't know about you, but when I owned my own businesses, if I would have taken a $96,000 hit, that would have been painful, right? I would have not been happy, and the impact to our business would have and probably would have been detrimental, right? Potentially even putting us out of business or putting us in a really bad place with our clients and our vendors, and even my staff and trying to meet payroll. So I need you thinking about these things because these are areas of concern. So let's go back to ransomware here for a moment. Per Fiserv, right? But we hear from Hiscox Insurance and from others as well, ransomware attacks are happening now about once every 11 seconds. Okay? That's enough to draw attention and saying, hey, this is a problem. Now, if you don't know what ransomware is where the attackers launch some malware and they encrypt all of your files so that you can't read them, basically rendering that data useless. And they hold the decryption key. It's kind of like being locked out of your house. They've got the key, and if you pay them, they'll give you back the key. But until you pay them, you're kind of stuck. Now, you might have backups, you might have other mechanisms, but it doesn't mean that they didn't look at the data, they didn't take the data, they didn't do something else with it. And so you've got a lot of business challenges to start thinking about, in the event of a ransomware attack, most of which none of us have ever been through, so we're like, how do we even know? Well, you've got to work with a service provider that understands these things and can help you map through and assess what the impact of that would be on your business. So I just gave you the definition. The dictionary definition is a type of malicious software designed to block access to computer systems until a sum of money is paid. They're holding your ransom from your data. Now, the reason it's important is because the trends have not been favorable for SMBs. At the end of last year, we saw the average ransom payment jump to nearly $178,000. So business email compromise at $94,000, ransomware at $178,000. But ransomware, that's just the payment to get your files back. It doesn't include the legal fees, the recovery fees, the insurance issues you're going to have, the breach notification laws that you might need to abide by because of compromised data. Your employees being upset because their information might have been compromised, right? The impact and the reputation to your business is far worse than the $178,000 you might pay to get your files back or get access back to your files. So it's a big deal, And again, these are the two types of attacks that are really impacting, small businesses, medium-sized businesses around the world because of the financial cost. Now, you probably start thinking, well, I'll go out and hire somebody. I'll put somebody on my team that can deliver security. And that's great, but there's a 0% unemployment rate in cybersecurity. Matter of fact, right now there's between 3.1 and 4.1 million unfilled cybersecurity positions. So even if you're good enough to attract and hire a cybersecurity professional for your business, they're hard to retain because every time they get a new certification, they start getting more job offers. And we see that in our own business, and I know that you're probably seeing in other parts of your business. This is the year where we're seeing a huge migration of the workforce. I think it was McKinsey said that nearly 40% of the workforce is going to change jobs this year. So security is one of those bigger issues, and you've got to figure out how to do it and work with teams so that you don't have a single point of failure with any one lost employee. Now, I'm telling you this because at the end of the day, we talk about data responsibility. And data responsibility is, who's in charge of this data and what's their roles in this? And we typically see three teams. The first is you, right? You're the data owner. You own the liability, meaning you're the one that will probably get sued in the event of an incident. You also provide the budget for protecting your data. So we've never looked at it as data protection. We've always looked at it, well, my servers, I'll just recover from backups. But cyber attacks are very different. A lot of the cyber attacks, they actually kill the backups too. They delete them and destroy them, and then you can't use those. So the only way to get out of it is to pay the fines, pay the ransom, and then deal with all the liability issues. But because you own the budget, you're ultimately the ones responsible. Now, information technology team. I know you want to think that they're the ones responsible, but they're responsible for implementing the controls and the services and solutions that you budgeted for. I mean, I'm assuming that you don't let your IT teams or your service providers go out and just spend money on your behalf without your permission, without budgeting for it. So they can only do so much within the confines of what you've given them. And that's really where the last team fits in. And that's the information security team. Quite often it is your service provider, and they've got some people dedicated to talking about information security, but they're really risk managers. And so it's probably a combination of their team and your team working together to identify the risk to your business, determine the impact, look at mitigation strategies, and be very clear here. Not everything in security costs money. Sometimes it just requires you sacrifice convenience. Or if it does cost money, it's inconsequential in the scheme of what an attack would actually look like. What I mean by that is a more difficult password or implementing multi-factor authentication, very low-cost items that do require a user to click a button or go get a code. But that change in structure in an environment has a substantial positive impact in your favor on reducing risk. So the information security team is going to assess where you are, determine what's important, and then help you decide what your mitigation strategies are. Again, some are just approval, some are budgets, and then you'll account for those and build those into your plan, going back to your information technology team, deploying them, then reassessing. It becomes this evergreen circle because security is not a destination. It's truly a journey, meaning you can't just do all these things today and now you're secure. It's going to keep changing because the landscape keeps changing. And so I would expect over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to go through some different technologies and you're going to invest in different ways to tackle the biggest problems that your business faces. So I've kind of given you the overall view of what it looks like. Now let's talk about what the impact is, on small businesses, because people just don't realize this. For example, who's doing the hacking? That's a question that always comes up. Is it organized crime? Yeah, it probably is these days. It's become a highly profitable business, unfortunately. Is it industrial espionage? Is it your competition trying to break in? I hope not, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, right? That's certainly a possibility. Could it be insiders? A lot of attacks start with people that, were recruited, and paid a bunch of money to take data from your network or provide access into your network. And it could be a colleague of yours that feels like they're underpaid, and they get recruited to become the insider to give access to your systems. I hate when that happens, but it happens more times than you probably realize. Is it hacktivists? Is it terrorists? Is it foreign governments? Yeah, it could be, but that's not usually where we see most of these impacting small businesses. So you're probably saying, well, but Jay, these attacks, these are all large companies, right? And they are. And there's quite a few of them, by names that we've seen in the past. But I want to talk about a couple of these really fast to show you how attack, for example, on Target really was impacted by a small business. So Target was really the first major retail chain to be compromised, and I forget the exact number now because it's been 6-7 years since it happened. But ultimately, it was the HVAC company, their heating and air company, that managed their heating and air controls up on the roof, the buildings that were wirelessly connected to the network that allowed the attackers in. See, the HVAC company had I'm going to use Cliff Notes version. I'm going to give you a very simple explanation. They had a spreadsheet that said, here's all the target locations, here's all their usernames and passwords for their Wi-Fi. Making it easy for their technicians to be able to manage that account, right? Here's the information to log in. Well, ultimately, that information was obtained and used to steal credit cards that were actually transacting on the network. So a small business had the impact of and to a major provider out there. Another one, British Airways. I was actually a victim of that attack. I had literally, like the day before, bought a flight in Europe because I was going there for business. And I got a call from American Express saying, hey, your account's been compromised. Now, my issue wasn't that it happened, because I know these things happen. I'm kind of beyond that these days, like we're all kind of numb to it. But I was most concerned about how British Airways handled it. See, their first email out basically took no responsibility. Made it sound like it was somebody else's fault. And I take issue with that, because in their case, it was their fault. And I must have not been the only person, because by that night, we had gotten a much better email. Their CEO was on the BBC talking about, what happened and what they were doing to make sure it never happens again, and what they were going to do to take care of those of us that were in the attack. Another one, Marriott. Marriott's fascinating because it really does tie back to small businesses, but not how you would expect. See, Marriott, I think it was back in 2018, they were compromised. It was the Starwood database, their program for rewards for people that are loyal to them and spend time and effort in their hotels. I'm a big Marriott fan. I'm part of the program. I was part of this breach. But what was fascinating is, as you started to read in the details, the original compromise happened in the Starwood guest database back in 2014. Okay, breach reported in 18. The original compromise was in 2014. Well, Marriott bought Starwood in 2016. So 2014 breach, 2016 they bought the business, 2018 the breach is identified. So Marriott basically bought the breach. So tie this back now to businesses like yours. Well, if you're looking at acquiring other businesses in your marketplace, or you're going to be acquired, or you're an accountant, or you're in the legal business helping with mergers and acquisitions, the lesson learned here is that you should be testing the security integrity of the data you're about to buy to make sure that you don't end up like Marriott, where you literally paid to replace millions of passports on behalf of your client base. And maybe it won't be as bad for you, okay, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking at it that way. So again, if you're involved in any type of mergers and acquisitions, data security is certainly a big topic. Now, I get that there are challenges, and you're all saying, but Jay, this isn't going to happen to me, right? And I get that. So let me tell you what we hear from most business owners just like you. First off, you tell us you're too small, that it's not going to happen to you. I showed you early on that nearly 65% of all attacks are happening to small businesses because you didn't know it could happen to you, right? So the risk is there. Next, you're going to tell us that's expensive and that you've already got solutions in place to cover basic security. Well, basic security is not enough anymore, and that's the problem. Basic security 5 years ago worked for attacks 5 years ago, but now we're in a much newer times, more technology, faster technology, more remote workforce. And you got to make sure you've got the controls in place to manage today's environment, not the environment from multiple years ago. Next, you're going to tell me that, it's inconvenient, right? I mentioned that before. I got to choose passwords. I got to put in, codes that get emailed to me or texted to me or calls to me, whatever it might look like, or I've got a key that I have to use. It's worth it, right? It's important that you actually are aware of that. And of course, you probably want to believe that your IT team has you covered. And it's that blind trust that I think gets, business leaders in trouble, because they think that their team has it covered, but they really don't. They think that those 2 or 3 tools they pay for, are actually sufficient, when today they're no longer reasonable to protect the data that you're trying to secure. So why don't we hear about, small businesses being attacked? I kind of covered this already. It's not newsworthy, right? Nobody cares when a small business gets hacked, except for maybe the local businesses, right? They might take interest. Local news stories might be there. It's embarrassing. I didn't go to the pub last night and say to my buddy, hey, we got hit by a ransomware attack today. What happened in your world, right? We're not doing that, nor should we, right? I don't want us to get to that point either. Obviously, the PR is bad. If you've got to notify your clients, that they were part of a cyber attack, how does that reflect on your business? And I'm guessing not in a way that you're going to be okay with. And ultimately, there's the legal ramifications, right? The fines, the lawsuits, the compliance issues that you're going to face. It's a problem. But probably what I want you to be most aware of, though, is that reputation to your business. At the end of the day, they're blaming you because you had the responsibility, and sadly, nobody told you. Nobody came out and said, hey, you should be aware of this. And because of that, that's why you're here today, right? To understand that you have this responsibility, this data responsibility, to make sure you're protecting your assets. Now, I mentioned before that, again, small businesses are being targeted. Look at this stat. 46% of SMBs have been targeted by ransomware, and 73% of them had to pay the ransom. That's roughly 30% of all businesses out there have done it. You just don't know it, right? And so I'm here to tell you, it's a big deal. It's costing businesses money, and I don't want you to fall victim. I want to make sure you're aware of these things before they actually happen. So let's talk about war stories. What's happened, some of these bigger stories that have gone on, and I'm not going to dive into each one of them, but I may go deep on one of them in particular that I have firsthand knowledge of. But we're hearing this all the time. Scripps CEO, ransomware, patient records will be restored this week. So imagine if you're a doctor's office and you can't see patients because of the attack on your software. That's a problem, right? Because as a physician, being in front of patients is how you earn a living. What if you're in legal services and you can't see any of your documents, having to do with cases that you're working? That's a problem. The list goes on and on. You can start to apply it back to your business. Like, hey, if I had no access to any of our systems right now, no data, no servers, how long could I run my business? And gone are the days where we could fall back to paper. We can't anymore. Everything is tied up into our data, so protecting it needs to be of utmost importance. Colonial Pipeline happened here recently. Shut down a U.S. pipeline. Imagine the impact if you're a power company, if you're a hydroelectric facility, if you're a pipeline company, right? And losing that. The reputation impact is important, but all about the lost revenue. Like, you're not pumping, so you're not making money, and that's a problem. Customs and Border Protection. You wouldn't think this was an issue, but if all of a sudden they had all of our names and addresses and pictures, that might be a concern, right? I'm kind of resigned to the fact that the attackers know exactly who I am. They've got all my information. They can figure out a lot of things about me just through what they've probably already obtained over the last several years worth of breaches. So let's talk about a specific law firm, and I've got firsthand knowledge here, so I'm giving you a little bit broader view, because you need to understand what happens when you're hit. So in this case, it was a law firm, about 140 users. I was hit by a ransomware attack late on a Friday night, heading into a long week. It was actually a holiday weekend, which happens a lot too. And in this case, 5 million files were encrypted, everything. So 89 workstations, all their servers, everything was encrypted. And they ended up paying at the time the $25,000 ransom. Now that was in 2016, okay? The ransom payments, as you saw, have jumped tremendously. And this business, through their insurance policy, would have paid whatever the ransom was because they were out of business without their data. Now you're probably saying, well, Jay, why didn't they just recover from backups? Well, in this case, their backups were corrupted. Literally, the attackers had been in the network for over 300 days, and nobody had detected them there. And so the attackers logged into the backup servers, and they unchecked all the data folders. So the backups were only backing up the routine Windows folders, the ones that you get on a disk when you buy a new computer. And nobody noticed. The size of the backups went from terabytes down to a terabyte or so of data because there was nothing being backed up. No one picked up on that. Again, processes and controls could have fixed that, but no one knew that that was that important. Well, we knew, they just didn't take action, right? Because of this, they were down for 2 weeks at the end of the year, right? Month end close, annual close, all those kinds of things were major issues for their attorneys and their staff that couldn't process and couldn't deliver the documents they needed to go to court. Ultimately, it took 39 hours per terabyte to restore the data after they paid the ransom and got the key. Okay? 39 hours per terabyte. Doesn't always take that long, but if I'm half wrong, 20 hours per terabyte, you should be asking your teams, how much data do you have? A terabyte is a lot of data, right? You probably have several, or maybe close to a terabyte of data, so you've got to be aware that, hey, that's a delay before you can even start getting back to work. It's just getting the files recovered. All right, so the sky is not falling, right? There are solutions, things that you guys can do today, and let's talk about what that might look like, because look, if you're prepared, the impact of a cyber attack is very different than if you're not prepared. And so I want to make sure you're ready. Ultimately, you need to be able to answer the question, how are you keeping your company out of the headlines? If you can't answer that question when it comes to cybersecurity, then you've got some work to do. So let me talk about the need for assessments and cybersecurity, because when we go back to the data responsibility pie, I don't want you to just go out and try to buy every technology, because that's not where you should start. You should actually start by looking inwards at your business to figure out where the most important assets and data reside. But to help give it to you in an analogy format, let's talk about your home, the place where you live. And so if we were in person, I would ask you guys this question. You guys can answer in the chat if you want to, but what's in your home that you care about, that you want to protect, that's worth protecting? Now, a bunch of you just, in the back of your mind, or even verbal, you might have said, my family, my children, my spouse, whoever's in your home. I probably heard pets. I probably heard electronics. If you keep going and dig a little deeper, you're probably saying, well, your important papers like your birth certificates and your passports and financial records, maybe family collectibles, those kinds of things. Jewelry, cash are the other two that end up at the kind of on that list of things that people care about. But you probably didn't mention your favorite chair, your bar stool, or your kitchen table, because insurance can take care of those things. But some things are just not really replaceable. So let's talk about electronics in that conversation for a minute. What's more important to you, your TV or your laptop? Yeah, I know. You all just said laptop. Well, why is that? And you probably just said, well, that's where my important stuff is. My pictures, my data, my money, my work, my everything. You're right. See, at the end of the day, not all items are created equal when it comes to cybersecurity. Right? Your data is very, very important to you. Your couch is not quite as much. So we're going to do the same exercise in your business as part of an assessment to really understand what's important to you, because I'm guessing 4, 5, 6-year-old tax records are not what you need to run your business this week. You need your business line applications, you need your accounting system, you need your communication systems to be operational. Those are probably the highlights of areas where you want to focus, and asking how secure are those versus how secure is my couch, right? Because it just doesn't matter anymore. So when they do an assessment with you, they're gonna kind of run through a process, and then they're gonna ask you some questions. It'll probably take about an hour of your time just to answer some questions to understand your position on security and what you care about. So when we go back to your house analogy for a second, how do you protect your house? What are some of the things that you actually do? I'm guessing that when we start looking at this, you're going to rattle off things like doors, locks, windows, alarm systems, dogs, baseball bats, or whatever weapon of choice you might have, camera systems, motion sensors, that nosy neighbor, right, that always emails when something doesn't look right in the neighborhood. All these are things that we see on a regular basis, and they're structured here very intentionally. See, doors, windows, locks, fence, yard signs, saying that you have an alarm system, are all ways to be proactive to protect your house. And you've got to be proactive, right? You've got to put in the firewall, the EDR or antivirus solutions, other tools to try to keep the most common attackers out. But people still break into your homes, right? Just like they still break into networks. It's the same issue. As a security specialist, I actually care more about the ability to detect an intruder than anything else. Think about that law firm that had been down for 2 weeks after a ransomware attack where the attacker had been in their environment for over 300 days. What if they would have caught him at minute 30? Heck, at 2 days as opposed to 300 days. What would the impact of the business be then? It's substantially different. So I want to detect as early as possible, and that's why around our homes we put in alarm systems, motion sensors, doorbell cameras, and we sign up for the neighborhood watch, right? It's looking out for each other. And of course, once we've detected, then we can respond. We can stick the dog on them, come at them with a baseball bat or frying pan or what have you. You can call the police, and of course, you can call your insurance company. So in the assessment process, we're going to look at protect, detect, and respond being important, but when we look at a framework like NIST, which is what most of us talk about when it comes to cybersecurity, we talk about the ability to identify what's important, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So in your business, I want to make sure you understand what those components are and what they look like. So we make sure we're focusing on the data that's most important, how we protect it, how we would detect an intruder, how we're going to respond, and ultimately, how are we going to recover? What does it look like to survive a cyber attack? Now, there are lots of technologies out there. As a matter of fact, these are probably the 15 most common that small businesses like yours are considering. And again, not just small businesses, medium businesses, even the enterprise, look at all these technologies as ways to help solve issues inside their business specific to security. But I don't know which one of these you need yet, or which 3 or 4 or 5 of these you might need. I don't know which ones you already have. So by starting with the assessment, we can actually focus our business and our efforts on what you care about most, show you what's currently included, and help you solve for the gaps that are probably most relevant to your business. You may not need all of these, but you probably need more than you have today. So what does an assessment look like, Jay? Let's go a little bit deeper, give you a little bit broader understanding of how it's going to play in my office, in my business specifically. So I mentioned, look, we're going to look at identify. What data do you want to protect? What are the threats that could impact that data? And ultimately, what is your current ability to detect and respond to those threats? Okay? And we're going to talk to your teams. We're going to not just talk with you, but we're going to talk to your leaders, maybe your finance people, your business line people, your sales people, to understand what they care about most. Because even within your own systems, you might only need this bit of data. Like, this is a must-have, these are nice-to-haves. We'll start to categorize that data and really help you figure out what's next. And then we're going to look at exactly how you can protect, detect, and respond. What boxes can we check? Meaning, what services do you already have that are in place? What are the remaining gaps? And ultimately, compared to the value of the assets, which gaps are worth solving for? You may not get them all, and that's okay. But if we don't understand which ones are there and what the priorities are, how can you possibly decide what type of solution to put in place? You can't, and you shouldn't. Don't let somebody talk to you about security that's not willing to assess where you are and build your roadmap going forward without that information. And of course, you then have to decide as the data owner, are you comfortable taking on the risk with those remaining gaps? There's some you just can't solve for. There's some that you may say, hey, we can't solve for it this year. Might be some, hey, we can't solve for it this quarter, but we can start building into our action plan going forward when it comes to security. And lastly, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the ability to recover or to survive an attack. For many of us, we'll start here and work our way back up the other direction because you got to have a plan, right? If you don't know what the plan looks like, how can we possibly measure against it? And the teams you work with, I know, are already prepared to help you write those recovery plans so that you've got them and you can document them, for your own systems, for your insurance company, for others that might be asking about them. We'll test your plan, make sure that we actually can implement what's there, and we'll test to make sure we find the flaws. It can't just give you one plan, so this is good for everybody, because every business is a little bit different. And knowing where your data resides and how you're going to recover is going to be very important in that process. Making sure your team understands their responsibilities. I don't want you to fall victim and be in the paper, right? Be on the news, because you didn't have a plan in place. In Scripps' perspective, they did have a plan. It just didn't move as fast as they thought that it would. And that actually cost them, the reputation with their clients. So look, at the end of the day, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about the impact of cybersecurity on your business, what the landscape looks like, and really how it's impacting small businesses with things like ransomware and business email compromise. Your ability to identify, protect, respond, and recover, become very, very important. So talk to your business partner. Talk to your service providers to understand what security looks like for you, and make sure you ask for an assessment. Give it to me in a report card or something I can look at quickly to say, hey, here are the gaps. And as I read through this, hey, there's 3 or 4 that I actually care a lot about. Like if these are gone for more than a few days, it would negatively impact my business. And with that, you can then take the right steps going forward when it comes to security and truly identifying what the right security is for your business. Now, whether you're a leader in the business, whether you're technical in the business and you're watching this, again, congratulations on taking the time to start to understand what the impact is to your business. And thank you for your time. And we appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing you soon.